back to Unmasked, the podcast that uncovers the thoughts, feelings, and voices of the BU community. I'm Ronnie Thompson.
And I'm Adam Lazowski. Every week, we go out and ask our peers a random, intriguing question and allow them to share their thoughts anonymously.
Our goal is to illuminate the wide variety of personalities and experiences within the student body. Thank you for joining us today.
Now let's turn it over to our field reporting segment to see what people had to say for this week's question.
Hi, I'm Ronnie Thompson.
And I'm Adam Lazowski.
And today we're at GSU and we're going to ask people, how should people deal with emotional pain?
How would you recommend people deal with emotional pain?
I think people should talk to their friends and family before going into anything harmful.
I would say for me what's worked best is getting together with friends, just spending time not even distracting yourself from something, but certainly just having a real connection with someone.
I think that I find that just taking time for yourself is really important. I like to journal a lot, or just little things like giving yourself time. Could be baking or going on a nice little walk. And I think that I isolate myself, which is not the best thing to do. So just trying not to do that.
Honestly, just go to the gym. There's no other better advice. Just go to the gym and figure it out there.
I would recommend people who are in emotional pain to, get the body moving, get the blood flowing, get some exercise, go outside, get the endorphins really moving. Because, personally, I do feel that whenever I feel a little bit stressed or a little bit dejected, going outside, going for a nice long run tends to solve all my problems. Or at least it gives me the illusion that my problems have been solved.
I think it's important to remember that sometimes we have pain that's so deep that we can't just dismiss the pain by doing, relatively recreational activities. And that we have to sometimes really acknowledge why we have the pain that we do. And a lot of that comes from introspection and really thinking deeply about our problems when we are at the right mental frame to do so. It's not necessarily in the moment that something traumatic happens that we can necessarily find ways to deal with it and cope. But over time, to really move past it, just hiding and suppressing pain doesn't solve the underlying issue that the pain's causing. And I think as people, if we want to move forward and grow it and develop as people, we need to come to a point in ourselves where we can eventually kind of understand why we feel the way we do. And I think that it's a really hard thing to do. And I think stuff like journaling is very helpful. And I also think it's important to also talk with friends, talk with family, somebody that you trust, and really work through those ideas out loud because, it might sound crazy up in your head, but when you speak, I think a lot of times speaking is kind of just articulated thought. And having that articulated thought kind of is a better expression than just you getting up in your head and going down these crazy rabbit holes. So I think it's important to remember that when you have really traumatic experiences, that you're allowed to sit with that pain for however long you need and to really process that in whatever way makes sense to you and take time and really work through that and understand why you feel the way that you do, because I feel like if you don't process it, you're never gonna really be able to grow from it, and it's just gonna keep coming back. And when a similar event comes up to you in your life, you're just gonna stumble again into, and I feel like that's the way a lot of people end up addicted to alcohol, drugs, is that they take these very short-term suppressants and they don't deal with the true root of it. And so, I've known plenty of people where that's been the case, and I think it's unfortunate. And, a lot of those, I think it's especially important to not use your coping mechanism as something that's going to cause you future problems down the line that just will further exacerbate the problems that you had in the first place.
Thank you so much.
I feel like they're I know in an unhealthy way, especially post-pandemic, I know a lot of people smoke all the time because it just makes it easier to forget when things are happening. I know I personally do this a lot, but I feel that's a big thing that I've noticed post-COVID. I don't know. I feel healthy ways. I don't know. I feel people deal with it in different ways. But I would say a lot of college students just like push it down and use like substances to kind of get over it. And even like caffeine and stuff, just like keep your mind occupied and busy. So you like overloading, I think, is a big one too. Like just keep your mind busy so you don't have to deal with it.
Can I say something? I think also in dealing with emotional pain, it is important to rely on your support system. And in college, like that's really important, and you meet a lot of people that you encounter. And so I think it's important to rely on each other. A lot of people are dealing with similar stressors and etc. So it's good to do that.
A follow-up, if you want to answer, you don't have to. How do you find a support system?
I think a big thing is like, I know for myself, like a lot of times you have people around you who genuinely like really care, but it can almost feel embarrassing to ask for help and like let people know that you're struggling. So I think that's a big thing. But I think just like taking the leap into like putting yourself out there and being vulnerable, like with the people that you do trust, because most likely they're gonna be like there for you. But like taking that step to be vulnerable, and like if the person you confide in, it like doesn't go the way you want to, that's like not to say, like there are truly people out there that like care, even if you aren't close with them, like there is a listening ear out there. So I feel like being vulnerable enough to share with people that like you feel that you can trust and like similarly would trust you, and like, you know, would keep that information like private or do with it what like they like do what responsibly do with that information what they may, is like really important.
Also, we're both transfer students, so we can speak on like finding like yourself in a new place and trying to find a support system. And I think it's again just important to be vulnerable and open to meeting new people, because you never know like who could impact your life, and it's just important. Yeah.
Like especially if you are a transfer, like every other transfer is like, where are you guys finding people? So even just being like, hey, like I'm also a transfer, like let's do something.
Yeah.
I don't think I am wise enough to be in a position where I can give people advice, but I would say don't drugs and cigarettes. It's not a good way to deal with it. I'd say talk to someone. I feel like that's the best solution.
Why?
I feel like speaking to people is just like the answer to pretty much all emotional ails. I think illnesses. Yeah. So. I would elaborate, but I can't think of how to say that more eloquently on the spot. Just talk to your friend, or like find a therapist, or talk to your parent, or just have someone you could speak to. I feel like that's by far the most important thing.
Speak, because there are people who do want to listen.
I think you gotta think about it to yourself for a little bit and kind of just assess like, you know, what am I going through right now? And then after that, then I would talk to your friends about it. I feel like they're like probably the best resource you got, because like they know what you're about, like they kind of know what you want to hear and what you need to hear. So I think definitely go to your friends and see what they got to say. So yeah.
Okay, so I read somewhere like a while ago, probably on Pinterest or somewhere, and it had this quote that said, when you're feeling angry or upset, irritated, or any kind of negative emotion in regards to other people, that's different than that feeling towards yourself. And so the way that you handle it is in two different ways. So when you're angry, for example, at other people, you need to eat. And if you're angry at yourself, you need to shower. And at first I was kind of like, okay, this is interesting, whatever. And then I started trying it, and it actually works. Like, it's very important, and it's one of my biggest coping mechanisms that I use, and it does help a lot. And then my other thing that I was going to talk about is like when you're in emotional pain, a lot of the bodily responses that end up happening is a closing off or a tightening. Like you feel tension in your body, and that's the physical manifestation of the emotions that you're going through. So doing activities that don't forcefully make you loosen up, but give you an opportunity to realize you have the power to open up is really important. So maybe laying on your back and just breathing, or taking a walk and noticing things outside of your body that are looser. Yeah, and getting outside of your head. Yeah, so that's my advice.
I think that the best way to deal with pain is to move through it, and at different points in the cycle, that means different things. So sometimes you need to coddle yourself and be kind to yourself, and sometimes you need to be a little bit harder on yourself, and then it's a cycle of that.
How would you recommend people to deal with emotional pain?
I find it really helpful to curate my own music playlists and do something that kind of will be healing, but also maybe speak towards whatever it is that I'm going through emotionally, whether it's grief, sadness, anger. And I also find it really helpful after curating that and listening to it to journal at the same time. I'll typically do it on a running Google Doc that I already have where I date things and it's literally just word vomiting onto a page, but I find that to be very cathartic and therapeutic because I feel it's harder and more difficult for me to verbalize my thoughts, and I've always been a more introspective person, and I show that by journaling. So writing is just a really great medium for me to be able to express those things and then internalize it and process it, which helps me move on.
A follow-up, if you're interested in answering, how long have you been practicing that? Is that something that somebody taught you or that came to you yourself?
No, I think that's something that, so my junior year in high school, I was taking an AP Lang class, and my teacher there was really helpful because she really encouraged us to be introspective and journal, not about our personal lives, but about the books that we were reading and kind of the connections that we made with different characters or different things along those lines. And that was something that I actually very much enjoyed doing. So after I did that for class, I was like, this actually might be a very good way for me to process some things because I was just going through a lot at the moment too. So I ended up going to Barnes & Noble and I bought my own little journal and I started writing. And then I got irritated with that because I was like, my hand is cramping up. So I moved to the computer and then I started typing. But that's something that I've just kind of kept all throughout college, and I feel like I didn't do it as much in the beginning of college, but when COVID hit, I was a junior at the time, and that was there was a lot of trauma that was related to that, and so I picked that up again, and that kind of in conjunction with a lot of the theoretical anthropology courses that I was taking at the time, they went hand in hand, and so it helped me actually build upon my pre-existing habits and make them better, which was a really good thing.
Thank you for sharing. We are debriefing after the episode. We got a variety of responses today. This question was particularly deep compared to the questions that we generally ask. And so trying to prompt people with it was definitely a challenge because a lot of people initially aren't comfortable with a question like this. So people really had to dig deep today. Those who were interested in answering really had to dig deep. And we got a really good diversity of responses, so I'm proud with this episode. For me, I think that one thing that's super important is the mentality that we as humans have around being human. And one thing that's a major part of the human experience is emotions and emotional pain. Emotions of all variety, you're going to experience them throughout your lifetime. And so acknowledging that, first of all, is important. One thing for me, one way that I've shifted my mentality over time around emotional pain is the way that I view crying. For me, crying it's a release, and it's really a healthy thing to do and not something to avoid or to suppress. And if somebody near me is crying, I'm not feeling awkward or I need to get them to stop crying as soon as possible. It's the opposite. Definitely keep crying. It's happening for a reason. You're supposed to cry. You're supposed to laugh. You're supposed to sweat. It's all the same type of thing. No, your body is doing what it's supposed to be doing. But because that's my mentality, I have to also remember that so many people do not view crying that way, and that crying isn't taught to us that way, and that it's all about don't cry, don't allow yourself to be sad. And so I actively challenge that notion. Why are we saying don't cry? Why are we avoiding something that is good for us? That's one thing that nobody really mentioned, but being gentle with yourself and saying, oh, I am human. I do have emotions. I'm supposed to have emotions, and I'm supposed to feel. So let yourself feel. What do you have to say, Adam?
One, allowing yourself to feel things and not suppressing emotions that are clearly supposed to come out, but you might not let come out for the safety of yourself. And secondly is the aspect of time. Initially, after some sort of emotional disaster, some sort of emotional consumption, you might initially feel like you shouldn't give it more time. You feel like you should confront it immediately. You feel like you should figure out and solve the problem immediately. But what you can realize over time is that if you really delve into figuring out what you need to focus on, and what the other individuals within your life need, then you can strike a balance and figure out what's most important. And at that point, that takes time. So once you figure out the amount of time that it needs, and once you figure out the way to feel those emotions to help you out through that process, I think that'll help the entirety of the situation and bring you hopefully to a better place in life. So yeah, thanks for listening to this week's episode. We'll continue pushing out ones like these, and we'll see you in the next one. See ya.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Unmasked, presented by the Daily Free Press, Boston University's independent student newspaper. Make sure to tune in every Wednesday.
You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. To hear previous episodes of Unmasked, visit dfpress.co/listen for our podcast archive.
Until we meet again,
Goodbye.